это проблема.
Almost 48 hours after Vladimir Putin's dramatic press conference and announcement to divide Ukraine into two, is Moscow planning a full-fledged invasion? Kiev says there's a high chance of that happening. Russia is evacuating its diplomatic staff from Ukraine. Ukraine is asking its citizens to leave Russia immediately. Putin says he's ready to look for diplomatic solutions. Zelensky says Russia and Ukraine should sit down at the negotiating table and talk. The sound of bombing can be heard near the Ukrainian front line. The West is slapping sanctions that don't seem to bother Russia. The West is also divided on what to call Russia's actions. They can't agree on the word invasion. That alone should tell you how they're failing to live up to their promises on Ukraine. On Gravitas tonight, as we bring you the latest on the fast-developing crisis, we'll also analyze the strategy of Ukraine's allies, why sanctions do not work, and why Joe Biden failed. We begin with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The U.S. Supreme Court formally ends former President Donald Trump's bid to block the release of White House records. These documents are sought by congressional investigators probing last year's attack on the U.S. Capitol. Sri Lanka's stock market bore the brunt of its financial crisis, prompted by shortage of dollars and surging inflation. Markets had to halt stock trading twice. The trading was suspended first when the gauge fell 5%, and then when it declined to more than 7.5%. Trading was suspended again. Hong Kong announces a nearly $22 billion budget to aid its struggling economy and boost spending, as the city battles its fifth and worst wave of coronavirus cases with the toughest curbs yet. Hong Kong has enforced 3 rounds of compulsory testing for its entire population. French President Emmanuel Macron will launch his re-election bid on March 5th with a rally in Marseille. Sources in his party say. Opinion polls suggest he is likely to lead the first round of voting on April 10th. Investigators say a man told his 4-year-old child to fire a gun at officers following a dispute over his order at a McDonald's drive-thru in suburban Salt Lake City in the United States. Reports say that the officer was able to swipe at the gun as it was fired, directing the bullet away. The names of former Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and a former Foreign Minister Mohammed Hanif Atmar have been removed from the UN Heads of State list. Afghanistan's seat at the UN was a contested issue after the resignation of the former ambassador following the fall of Kabul in 2021. Inspired by the protests in Canada, U.S. truck drivers gathered in California to form a protest convoy bound for Washington, D.C. Calling themselves the People's Convoy, they are protesting COVID curbs and mask mandates. The Dutch police ended a hostage-taking at an Apple store in Amsterdam after a man armed with 2 guns held at least 1 person hostage for hours. The police arrested the suspect after he ran away and was hit with a car. World number 3 Alexander Zverev has been sensationally expelled from the Mexican Open in Acapulco for unsportsmanlike conduct. The reigning Olympic champion struck the umpire's chair with his racket several times and was even close to hitting the umpire's foot once. Zverev has apologized for his behavior and called it unacceptable. Chelsea have continued their Champions League title defense with a 2-0 victory over Lille in the first leg of the round of 16 tie. Goals in each half from Kai Havertz and Christian Pulisic gave the Blues a comfortable win at Stamford Bridge. Juventus were held to a 1-1 draw by Villarreal despite Dusan Vlahovic scoring just 32 seconds into his Champions League debut.
Russia is not backing down.
There were tanks spotted moving in.
If Russia should enter Donetsk or Luhansk territories, which are still considered Ukrainian under international law, that would provoke, he said, sanctions.
Putin's proxies are on the march. They've got a republic. They've got Russian military support. Now the battle begins. Russian soldiers are freely roaming in Donbas. Their tanks are rolling down the streets. This is not Russian support. This is a Russian occupation. Putin has got the license from his parliament. Russian troops have been cleared for foreign deployment. Their destination, Donetsk and Luhansk. The two rebel republics recognized by Vladimir Putin. These regions do not have borders. They have what they call a conflict line. To the west is territory under Kiev. To the east is rebel land. And remember, this is the conflict line. The rebels actually claim a lot more territory. Territory that is now under Kiev's control. Until now, they did not have the means to push on. Yes, Russia was supporting them, but that was covert. Putin had to pretend that he also backed the Minsk agreement. Now there's no such issue. He can openly invade. The question is, how does the West see it? And the answer depends on which leader you talk to. Listen to this.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as he indicated and asked permission to be able to do from his Duma.
So what we see now is that a country which is already invaded is suffering further invasion.
We've seen Vladimir Putin's recognition of the so-called republics in the Donbas region, and we're seeing all the precursors to a serious invasion, claims of Ukrainian troops doing sort of operations, so-called false flags.
All this talk about Western solidarity, and they can't even agree on something as basic as this. Is this an invasion? Biden says it is the beginning of an invasion. NATO says Russia has already invaded. The UK says this is a precursor to serious invasion. Let's make it simple for the West. Invasion is not like skin tan. You don't have different levels or different intensity. If a foreign country enters into another without permission, it is an invasion. It doesn't matter how big the operation is. An invasion is an invasion. And playing around with this definition is dangerous. Until last month, Joe Biden agreed. He was all aggressive and bold. Listen to what he said on the 20th of January.
I've been absolutely clear with President Putin. He has no misunderstanding. If any assembled Russian units move across the Ukrainian border, that is an invasion.
We've got news for Joe Biden. Russian units have moved across the Ukrainian border, but America's response is half-hearted. Joe Biden unveiled 4 major economic sanctions. We'll discuss that in a bit. But he also said that more sanctions were in the pipeline. Those sanctions will come only if Russia escalate. If not, end of story. And this is precisely what Vladimir Putin wanted. He wanted to test the waters to see how the West would react. And what he's got is a feeble response. Washington is saving the painful sanctions for later. Europe is not willing to leverage gas imports, so all eyes are now on Putin. Does he still want to push ahead, or does he want to consolidate?
Our country stays open for direct and honest dialogue for the search of diplomatic solutions for the most complex issues. But I will repeat, Russia's interests, our citizens' safety are absolute, so we will continue strengthening and developing our army and navy, increasing their efficiency, providing them with the most advanced equipment.
Another twist. He wants dialogue. Last time Putin pushed for talks, his demands were designed to be rejected. This time it's more of the same, you could say. Vladimir Putin has 3 demands for Ukraine. Number 1, recognize Russian sovereignty over Crimea. Number 2, drop the plan to join NATO. And number 3, partially demilitarize. These demands are also designed to be rejected. No Ukrainian leader can accept them. And Putin knows this. He knows that Volodymyr Zelensky will not accept these demands. So his real strategy is not talks. It is the battlefield. We've got more satellite pictures from Ukraine. What do they show? More deployments in 2 sectors, Belarus and Western Russia. In Belarus, more than 100 military vehicles have arrived. Dozens of tents have been pitched on an airfield. This is less than 40 kilometers from Ukraine. In western Russia, the deployments are in Belgorod. More artillery has arrived. Field hospitals have been set up. Belgorod is less than 20 kilometers from Ukraine. Basically, we're seeing a military operation unfold in real time. Each time we check, the Russian deployments swell. More troops, more tanks, more field hospitals, and each time they're closer to Ukraine. How does Kiev plan to repel this Russian juggernaut? President Zelensky has two concerns. A, he must not create panic and alarm. That's the last thing that Ukraine needs. And B, he must continue to build up his military strength. So Zelensky has adopted a middle path. No general mobilization, only reservists will be called up.
На сьогоднішній день немає потреби.
There is no need for the general mobilization today. We need to bring up the Ukrainian army to its full strength and other military units in a speedy fashion. As Commander General of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, I issue a decree to recruit reservists during a special period.
Резервістів в особливий період.
Ukraine Security Council has also declared a state of emergency. Again, this is a preventive measure. More border checks, more restrictions on traveling. The emergency is expected to last for 30 days. How is the West helping out? Joe Biden did announce more military assistance for Ukraine. He also redeployed US forces in Europe. 800 soldiers will be moved from Italy to the Baltic region. And 8 F-35 fighter jets will move from Germany to the eastern flank. So both Russia and NATO are flexing their muscles. Let me show you what Eastern Europe looks like right now, starting with Russian deployments. They've got 10,000 soldiers, 60 aircraft, 140 ships near Crimea in the south. To the north is Belarus, where they have 30,000 odd soldiers, plus Iskander missiles and Su-35 jets. To the east is the rebel-held region. This is where the big boys are deployed, around 110,000 Russian soldiers. You've got field hospitals, tanks, everything needed for a bloody battle. On the western flank is NATO. How do they stack up? Around 6,900 soldiers in Poland, 1,600 Lithuania, 1,200 each in Latvia and Estonia, and 900 in Romania. That's a lot of firepower encircling Ukraine. Where does that leave diplomacy? Hanging by a thread. Earlier today, the presidents of Poland and Lithuania visited Kiev. Ukraine had a clear demand from them, specific and immediate security guarantees. What did they actually get? A proposal to make Ukraine a European Union candidate. It may sound path-breaking, but Ukraine's immediate concern is not its economy, it is the security. And on that, the European Union cannot help. Only NATO can help. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has cancelled his meeting with Russia's foreign minister. The Biden-Putin summit is not happening. Looks like diplomacy has largely been abandoned. Instead, both sides are opting for coercion. Putin with a military build-up, Biden with sanctions. So this conflict is not going away anytime soon. Russia will keep bleeding Ukraine with insurgency. The West will keep sending weapons. The question is, who has more patience? Putin, whose only obsession is Ukraine, or Biden, who is dealing with Ukraine, Iran and China at the same time? So here's what we have as of today. Russia has unilaterally changed the power structure in Europe. What is the West doing about it? Slapping sanctions. We've been telling you about this for a while now. The West's threats and now the actions. The US has sanctioned Russia. Australia has sanctioned Russia. So has Canada, the United Kingdom, Germany, Ukraine, the European Union and Japan. Now these sanctions have been packaged under different names. The EU is calling them the initial sanctions package. The UK is calling them the first tranche of sanctions. They all target the Russian economy. China says this is not the best way forward. And for a change, China is right. Sanctions do not work. Russia was sanctioned in 2014, remember, after it took Crimea. And that did not stop Russia from taking Donbas. In 2014, the US, the EU, Canada, Japan, Switzerland and Ukraine had sanctioned Russia. They targeted Russian banks, Russian companies, even some citizens. Did that help? I will answer that question for you with another question. Did you know that the company that owns Nord Stream 2 is sanctioned by the United States? The name of the company is Gazprom. It controls the $11 billion gas project, Nord Stream 2. Then we come to the UK. They too sanctioned Moscow. But between 2014 and 2021, Russian companies raised at least $1.8 billion a year on the London Stock Exchange. So much for sanctions. If the West is serious about punishing Putin, it needs a better strategy. Do they have one in Donbas? Well, not yet. They're giving Russia the same vodka in a new bottle. The US, for example, has sanctioned 2 state-owned banks. Blocked from trading on US and European markets, their American assets frozen. Impact on Russia? Some market volatility. But Putin is prepared for this. Russia has enough and more reserves. More than $600 billion in gold and forex reserves. Also a concrete plan, it seems. The Russian finance minister told Reuters that all bank deposits, transactions and foreign currencies will be secured. The UK too has sanctioned Russian banks. But most of them are pretty small players in the Russian economy. Here's something else that you must know. Post-Crimea, Russian state banks cut their exposure to Western markets, meaning these sanctions won't hurt them very much. The UK has also sanctioned some Russian billionaires. They've been on the US sanctions list since 2018, these same people. So what new is the UK doing? Targeting banks is proving to be fruitless. Targeting already sanctioned individuals is senseless. What about Russia's dream project, the Nord Stream 2? Well, Germany has halted it, not stopped, halted. What's more, the first phase of this very same project remains unaffected. I'm talking about Nord Stream 1. That pipeline, Nord Stream 1, still continues to supply Russian gas to European markets. So for now, Russia's gas suppliers remain unaffected, which means the sanctions so far are cosmetic. They're not closing Kremlin's currency taps. The West knows that Russia has diversified big time since 2014. It has moved away from US treasuries and from the US dollar. Today, the euro and gold account for a bigger share of Russian reserves. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov recently brushed off Western sanctions. He said, "We're used to them. We know that sanctions will be imposed anyway, in any case, with or without reason. So let's not waste time discussing these sanctions anymore. Instead, let's tell you what countries can do or could have done if they were serious about punishing Russia. The UK, for instance, could have cracked down on Russian oligarchs and their families, the ones staying in London. Some of them even have British passports. The UK could also have sanctioned Russian companies. At least 31 of them are listed on the London Stock Exchange. Their combined market value is £468 billion. That's more than $600 billion. Hitting there would have hurt Moscow. If Johnson is serious about punishing Russia, he can start by freezing these businesses. That might make Russia rethink. That might also earn Johnson some much-needed political points at home. Right now, he's being called out for his half-baked sanctions. Experts say they lack bite. And Boris Johnson knows this. So does every Western leader. There is a reason why these countries are only slapping symbolic sanctions on Russia, because starting an economic or trade war will boomerang. It will hit Western energy industries. And if that happens, how will the US and its allies drive their pandemic growth? So as we keep saying, sanctions have historically failed. And the key word here is historically. History plays an important role in geopolitics. World leaders must dive into history. They must learn lessons from the past. If not, they will fail. Case in point, Joe Biden. He had so much history to learn from. In 2008, NATO held its famous Bucharest summit. Ukraine and Georgia were touted as possible members. Months later, Putin attacked Georgia. In November 2013, the Euromaidan protests erupted in Ukraine. By March next year, Putin annexed Crimea. Biden had a front row seat to all of this. He was Obama's running mate during Georgia, 2008. He was vice president during Crimea, 2014. And he's president during Donbas, 2022. Once again, Joe Biden's foreign policy chops have failed. I guess experience does not guarantee success. Many are calling this Biden's Chamberlain moment. What does that mean? Neville Chamberlain was Britain's prime minister from 1937 to 1940. What is his claim to fame? That he was fooled by Adolf Hitler. In 1938, Chamberlain signed a peace deal with Hitler. Germany could invade Sudetenland, but no more. Chamberlain thought he had succeeded. He claimed to have created what he called peace in our times. Well, he was wrong. The very next year, Hitler invaded Poland and World War II broke out. Biden may not be striking deals with Putin, but he's falling for the same trap. He's weighing expansionism on a scale. How much expansionism is fine? How much is not? And this strategy is counterproductive. Republican lawmakers in the US are already worried. They say if Russia is not punished, another US ally, Taiwan, could be next.
China is making the same type claims against an island called Taiwan. For years and decades, the United States has been helping Taiwan maintain its independence and its democracy. China has been very threatening. If we allow Russia to get away with destroying the Ukraine, it's just a matter of time till China takes over Taiwan.
The public is also turning on him. Joe Biden's latest approval ratings are out. 40% of the Americans do not approve of his 40% Americans, in fact, approve of his foreign policy. Only 36% approve of his Russia policy. Now, at first glance, this may look okay because most US presidents hover around the 40% mark. But remember, this is Russia, America's favorite villain. Ideally, there should be public support for action against Putin, whether it's troops, sanctions, or just plain posturing. But not for Joe Biden. His handling of the Ukraine crisis has made things worse. Let me give you an example. On January 19th, Biden was addressing the media. He was talking about America's response if Putin invades. Listen closely to what he said.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
That was a dead giveaway. Biden basically said there would be two responses, one for an all-out invasion and another for a so-called minor incursion. Well, that may have been the plan, but as a politician, you're not supposed to reveal all of it. If you do, you're helping the enemy. And that's what Biden did. A couple of days later, the White House clarified his remarks. They said if any Russian units cross over, it would be an invasion. But it was too late. Putin had heard what he wanted to hear. A minor incursion would only have minor sanctions. So Russia did exactly that. They organized a minor incursion into eastern Ukraine. The fact is, Biden was out of his depth. He tried talks, he tried threats, he tried rallying allies, he tried sanctions. Maybe the idea was to cover all bases, but in reality, Biden looked confused. And it's not like he did not have the means. You see, each conflict has multiple phases, and each phase plays out differently. In December last year, Putin had the upper hand. Yes, he did. Towards January end, the momentum had shifted. Putin looked stuck. That was the moment for Biden to drive home the advantage, maybe offer new terms to Putin or announce a few economic sanctions. Instead, Joe Biden fumbled. He talked about minor incursions. He ordered embassy staff to relocate. He asked Americans to leave Ukraine. All of this sent the wrong signal. And in February, Biden turned to war hysteria. This sort of confused messaging can be fatal in politics. Instead of a united and firm policy, Joe Biden opted for trial and error. His actions came too late. Like Obama's sanctions in 2014 were ineffective, so too will Biden's in 2022. Well, sanctions or no sanctions, one thing is certain, this crisis will severely impact global energy markets. It already is impacting them. Energy prices are whipsawing. On Tuesday, the price of oil alone climbed to a 7-year high. The price of natural gas also skyrocketed. Why? Because Russia is the third largest supplier of natural gas in the world. If there's a war, Russian supplies would unmistakably be hit. And this has unnerved investors. It has rattled energy markets. Our next report deconstructs their fears.
Energy markets don't like uncertainty or disruption. The situation in Eastern Europe has triggered both. Why? Because Russia is quite simply one of the largest suppliers of natural gas in the world. The third largest, to be precise. If it holds back gas supplies to Europe, a lot of economies would be crippled. Look at this graph. Russia exports about 5 million barrels of crude oil per day. 48% of this goes to Europe, and 42% to Asia. If we speak of natural gas, 72% of Russia's supplies go to Europe, and the remaining to Asia and beyond. What does this tell you? That any sanctions on Russia will hurt Europe too, and impact Asia, which is why markets are on the tenterhooks. Energy prices are rising, equities are in freefall. On Tuesday, the global benchmark Brent crude oil climbed nearly 5% to hit $98 per barrel, the highest level in 7 years. The price of US benchmark crude also rose 3.5% to hit $94 per barrel. The price of natural gas has also whipsawed. When trading began, Dutch front-month gas futures jumped 13.8%. The European natural gas futures jumped 11%. Both, however, eased considerably by the end of the day. 24 hours on, the markets still remain unnerved. Investors are bracing for both an invasion and sanctions. An invasion could interrupt natural gas and oil shipments to most of Europe. A sizable portion of Russia's exports are carried through pipelines. Most of these pipelines pass through Ukraine. If a war occurs, these pipelines could get shut, like the Nord Stream 2, which has already been put on hold. The other risk is sanctions. If they target Russia's energy exports, Western oil companies with interests in Russia will have a tough time. This includes Shell, Europe's largest oil company. It has a stake in a gas project off eastern Russia. ExxonMobil is also a partner in an oil facility in the same area. Total Energies, a French natural gas giant, is part of a gas project in the Russian Arctic. And India's Bharat Petroleum has a 20% stake in Russia's national oil company, Rosneft. The sanctions under consideration could make it tough for these companies to operate in Russia. They will be under pressure to abide by the sanctions. The US State Department says this won't necessarily happen. It is issuing statements on how the sanctions are not likely to disrupt the flow of energy in global markets. Could this change in the days ahead? This, America did not clarify.
They say it's always a good time for diplomacy, but in this case, I have to disagree. Russia is breathing down on Ukraine's neck. It is mobilizing troops, facing sanctions. Right now, Putin's only focus is Ukraine. In the middle of all of this, he has to turn host. Because guess who is visiting Moscow? Pakistan's Prime Minister ImranKhan. Such bad luck could only befall one leader. ImranKhan is arriving in a tense Moscow. The residents are preparing for war. The leaders are busy plotting. Chances are ImranKhan will be a side note. It's really unfortunate for Islamabad because they have spent months planning this. The last official visit by a Pakistani Prime Minister was in 1999, 23 years ago. So Imran Khan's trip is the first in more than 2 decades. What does his itinerary look like? Rumor is Russia never even invited Imran Khan to Moscow. This visit was sought by Pakistan. His plan includes a walk around the Red Square, a meeting with Vladimir Putin, an interview with Russian state media, a meeting with the Grand Mufti of the Russian Federation, and a visit to the tomb of the unknown soldier. A short but effective 2-day trip. That was Pakistan's plan. But the timing could not have been worse. Now, if this was a normal bilateral relationship, the visit would have been fine. But this is not a normal relationship. Pakistan and Russia were Cold War rivals. The US supported Pakistan, the Soviet Union supported Russia. So what explains this new romance? In social media terminology, a mutual friend, China. Pakistan has reduced itself to a Chinese colony. Its economy, its defense, everything is linked to Beijing. Russia, too, is cultivating closer ties with China. Earlier this month, Vladimir Putin visited Beijing for the Winter Olympics. Both Xi and Putin released an important joint statement. Their intention was clear, a strategic and financial partnership. So China is playing matchmaker here. It is bringing 2 former rivals together. The question is, what's in it for them? Is a Russia, China, Pakistan axis possible? Not anytime soon. Not a single Russian or Soviet leader has visited Pakistan. in their history, not one. There are no defense deals, no strategic agreements. This visit is basically a baby step. Nonetheless, India's Foreign Minister Jaishankar was asked about this axis. Could it become something like the Quad? Let me tell you what he said, and I'm quoting. What does it take to put a Quad-like body together? It takes a lot of comfort. It takes a lot of systemic interaction. It takes strong leadership commitment. It's when all of these things are there that the geometry actually begins to form, the Quad. The minister is right. What do Russia, China and Pakistan have in common? One is an atheist communist state. Another is a so-called Islamic republic, though in reality it is an army with a state. And the third is a declining power that pretends to be a democracy. Clearly not a lot in common. This alliance, if it ever exists, is all about negative ambitions. Russia gets an anti-Western ally, China gets a new Pacific partner, and Pakistan gets a counterweight against India. But such partnerships do not last long. For any substantial alliance, you see, you need to invest political capital. You need to go beyond one official visit. Can Pakistan or Russia do that? Back in Islamabad, ImranKhan's own position is shaky. Opposition parties are plotting a no-confidence motion against him. Some of his own party legislators are being taken away. They've broken away. As for Putin, he's a wartime leader. He will meet anyone who can help him subvert Western sanctions. Can Pakistan do that? Russia is building a gas pipeline in Pakistan, and we all know their army's insatiable demand for weapons. So Pakistan may seem like an attractive market for Russian gas and weapons. Just one problem. They don't have the money to buy either. Russia and Pakistan is a relationship that sounds possible on paper. Russia can give Pakistan access to Central Asia. Putin thinks Pakistan can contain Afghan extremists. Like I said, it sounds good. But neither ImranKhan nor Vladimir Putin is in any position to invest very much. So does that mean that India can ignore this trip? Well, nothing in geopolitics is irrelevant. Ukraine will not be a conflict forever, remember. So India cannot write off the possibility of Russia-Pakistan relations. In the long run, it must prepare for all eventualities. Now back to Ukraine. The West, we know, has failed. They could not stop Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Their sanctions make little difference. And they're confused about what to call Russia's actions, an escalation, an invasion, or an act of war. Where do you think this chaos leaves China? In the victory stand. We've been telling you how China is closely watching the Ukraine crisis. Beijing wants Taiwan, just like Russia wants Ukraine. Both base their claims on history. To Beijing, this crisis is dry run. A chance to see what can go wrong if it invades Taiwan. A chance to see how the West responds to invasion, or how military alliances react. Based on what China's seen so far, the rewards of an invasion outweigh the risks. So here's China's lessons from the Ukraine crisis. Western security guarantees do not work. That is the biggest takeaway. The UK and the US had agreed to protect Ukraine's sovereignty. What are they doing now? Offering Moscow olive branches, bubble wrapped in sanctions. The West promised to protect Taiwan too. Will they deliver when the time comes? Ukraine was a litmus test, you could say. The West failed, and China is latching onto this. Speaking after Ukraine's invasion, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, no country should repeat the past mistake of forging rival alliances. Do you know what makes this even more embarrassing for the West? After all the preparedness, all the threats, all the shuttle diplomacy, the West is in fact leaning on China to restore Ukraine's sovereignty. You heard that right. Right after Russia decided to send troops to Donbas, Washington and Beijing got on a call. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. The State Department later said, and I'm quoting, the Secretary underscored the need to preserve Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Who was put in charge of this? China. This Western confusion clears China's road to Taiwan. It helps the dragon chase its dreams undeterred and unafraid. And Taiwan knows this, so it's taking no chances. It has told its military to be on standby. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen says a country will do everything to thwart attempts to misuse the Ukrainian situation. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has already warned Taiwan of a possible domino effect.
If Ukraine is invaded, the shock will echo around the world. And those echoes will be heard in East Asia, they will be heard in Taiwan.
China has responded to this. It says Taiwan is not Ukraine. It has always been an inalienable part of China, meaning forget pre-recorded speeches and Security Council shebang. Unlike Russia, we will go for annexation straight. We'll be watching that story. These truly are testing times for the world. One conflict runs the risk of triggering another. The smallest of incidents or mishaps could have global repercussions. They could disrupt stock markets, cause supply chain pain. A tragedy which recently unfolded in the Atlantic has come as a reminder. A week back, a cargo ship carrying 4,000 luxury cars, 4,000, caught fire in the middle of the ocean. These cars were worth more than $400 million. The blaze has destroyed all of them. Here's a report.
This is Felicity Ace, a 600-foot-long cargo ship used primarily to carry luxury cars. On the 10th of February, it left the coast of Emden in northwest Germany for the port of Davisville in the United States. On board were 22 crew members and at least 4,000 top-notch vehicles. There were 1,100 Porsches, 189 Bentleys, Volkswagens, Lamborghinis, and Audis. Unfortunately, all 4,000 of them have been burnt to a cinder. These visuals are from the Azores archipelago near Portugal. It shows plumes of thick smoke rising from the vessel as the Portuguese Air Force tries to evacuate the crew. It's still not clear what sparked the fire, but what kept it burning were the lithium-ion batteries inside the cars it was carrying. Do you know how much these cars were worth? According to an insurance estimate, $401 million, or 295 million euros. And if we include the salvage cost, then the total losses will be worth $500 million. The Volkswagen Group alone is expected to suffer $155 million in losses, besides complaints from its customers over delays. Porsche is already sending letters to impacted clients. Like Matt Farah, an American television host. His 2022 Porsche Boxster Spyder with a retail price of $123,000 was among the many cars lost at sea. This entire incident has once again demonstrated how fragile global supply chains really are. Just last year, the grounding of Ever Given in the Suez Canal cost global trade between $6 to $10 billion. And this year, a fire on board one cargo ship will cost car makers $551 million. Imagine if these were not solitary incidents. Imagine if a conflict were to block sea routes or damage cargo ships. The disruptions caused to global supply chains would be irreversible.
Let me tell you about the latest on the Wuhan virus, its origins to be specific. It's been 2 years since the pandemic hit us. We still do not have a definite answer as to how this virus originated. We know that the SARS-CoV-2 has been circulating in bats for a long time, but how did it come to infect humans? Was the transmission natural? Was it artificial and intentional? Or was it by accident? The UK seems to think the Wuhan virus leaked from a lab, not just any lab, but the infamous Wuhan lab, aka the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The government of Prime Minister Boris Johnson is seriously considering the lab leak theory. Discussions are happening behind closed doors. So how do we know about them? Because of something that happened in the House of Commons, Boris Johnson told the lawmakers that the UK needs to revisit its biosecurity strategy. Do you know why? To protect the country against, quote-unquote, natural zoonosis and laboratory leaks. These 5 words speak volumes. And they once again bring China in the spotlight. We've been telling you for 2 years now that the lab leak theory carries weight, that the Wuhan wet market may just be a distraction. The experts we spoke to, the detailed interviews we aired, have time and again pointed at the Wuhan lab. We told you how the lab was collecting virus samples, experimenting on dangerous coronaviruses. It was from this very lab that the Wuhan virus is likely to have leaked. First, it affected people in the city of Wuhan, and then it went on to kill nearly 6 million people worldwide. Here's what a British expert now says on the lab leak theory, and I'm quoting. I think the official view within the government is that it is likely as anything else to have caused the pandemic. A lot of people like myself think it is more likely. I think attitudes have changed a little bit. The zoonotic transfer theory just doesn't make sense. Back in 2021, we reported that 3 months before the pandemic, the Wuhan lab took a database of 22,000 virus samples offline. We told you how 3 Wuhan researchers were sick just weeks before China disclosed its first case. It's not for nothing that China never allowed investigation into the Wuhan lab. That lab likely has enough evidence on the Wuhan virus's origin. Things that China will never want you and I to know. Today, experts across the world are considering the lab leak theory. Even WHO scientists say the virus may have leaked from the Wuhan lab. It's not for nothing that we continue calling it the Wuhan virus. And it's not for nothing that we continue to say that the world should make China pay. We'll wrap with that, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.